The year 2245 marked a pivotal moment in the history of humanity, a time when the universe itself seemed to conspire against the existence of the human race. The Galactic Empire, an insidious and sprawling behemoth that had devoured a third of the Milky Way, turned its malevolent gaze toward Earth. For eons, the Empire, under the tyrannical rule of Emperor Horus, had expanded its dominion, enslaving countless worlds and extinguishing entire civilizations. Earth's arrival on the Empire's radar was inevitable, a tiny blue dot in the vast cosmic ocean, rich in resources and teeming with life, yet militarily inferior to the vast forces commanded by Horus. The demands of the Empire were as cold as the vacuum of space itself. Earth was to surrender unconditionally, to submit to the yoke of alien overlords, or face utter destruction. The ultimatum, delivered by Horus himself, resonated through every communication channel on Earth, a harbinger of doom that sent shockwaves across the planet. The response from Earth's leaders, however, was not one of immediate surrender or despair. No. Within the heart of humanity, there burned a fire that refused to be extinguished, a fire kindled by the indomitable will to survive, to fight, and to resist, even in the face of insurmountable odds. In the shadowed chambers of Earth's highest councils, debates raged with an intensity that matched the growing threat looming just beyond the planet's atmosphere. The leaders of Earth, a collection of politicians, military commanders, and scientific minds, were deeply divided. On one side stood those who advocated for capitulation, arguing that surrender was the only way to preserve the human race, to avoid the annihilation that had befallen so many other worlds. They spoke of the Empire's overwhelming technological superiority, of the futility of resistance, of the lives that would be lost in a war that humanity had no hope of winning. But on the other side of the argument stood those who believed that to surrender was to forfeit the very essence of what it meant to be human. Among them was Commander Brian Campbell, a seasoned Navy SEAL turned commander of Earth's space defenses, a man who had seen firsthand the horrors that awaited those who fell under the Empire's rule. Campbell was a soldier hardened by battle, his eyes cold and unyielding, his resolve as unbreakable as the steel he carried into combat. He knew what submission to the Empire would mean: slavery, degradation, and the slow, systematic destruction of Earth's culture, history, and very soul. For Campbell, there was no choice but to fight. Better to die on their feet than live on their knees. His voice, steady and commanding, cut through the cacophony of debate like a knife through flesh, rallying those who were uncertain, bolstering the resolve of those who feared. The decision was made in that room, not by the majority, but by the sheer force of Campbell's conviction: humanity would resist. And so, preparations for war began in earnest. Earth's defenses, meager and outdated compared to the vast armadas of the Empire, were hastily mobilized. The planet's orbital grid, a patchwork of satellites and aging warships, was reinforced with whatever could be spared. Factories churned out weapons and ammunition, while every able-bodied man and woman was called upon to take up arms. The global network of resistance, once a loose collection of militias and underground cells, was unified under a central command, with Campbell at its head. There was no time to mourn what was to come, no time to reflect on the potential cost. There was only time to act, to prepare, and to fight. Meanwhile, high above Earth, in the cold reaches of space, the Empire's armada gathered, a dark cloud on the horizon, its ships blotting out the stars. Emperor Horus, from his flagship, observed the preparations on Earth with a mixture of amusement and disdain. To him, humanity's efforts were nothing more than the thrashing of a dying animal, futile and meaningless in the face of the overwhelming power he wielded. Horus was a being devoid of mercy, a ruler who saw no value in negotiation or diplomacy. To him, there was only power, and the exercise of that power over those weaker than himself. He ordered his generals to proceed with the invasion, to crush the human resistance without delay, to make an example of Earth for all other worlds that might consider defiance. The invasion began with a fury unmatched in the annals of war. The Empire's ships descended upon Earth like a storm, their weapons tearing through the orbital defense grid with terrifying precision. The skies above the planet were filled with the fire of battle as human ships, outnumbered and outgunned, fought valiantly against the tide. But for every Imperial ship that fell, 10 more took its place, and the human forces were slowly but surely overwhelmed. On the ground, the situation was even more dire. The Empire's dropships landed in Earth cities, disgorging wave after wave of scale-armored troops, their weapons cutting through civilians and soldiers alike with cold efficiency. The cities of Earth, once bustling with life, became battlefields, their streets running red with blood. The alien invaders moved with practiced precision, their ranks unbroken by the sporadic resistance they encountered. Yet, despite the overwhelming force arrayed against them, the people of Earth did not surrender. Under Campbell's leadership, resistance fighters engaged the invaders in brutal urban combat, using guerrilla tactics, traps, and ambushes to strike at the enemy. In the ruins of New York, in the burning streets of London, in the shattered remains of Beijing, humanity fought back with a tenacity that took the Empire by surprise. For every block lost, another was fortified. For every soldier that fell, another took their place, driven by the same unyielding resolve that had guided Campbell's decision to resist. The cost was high. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, families torn apart, lives ended before they had truly begun. But the resistance held. Days turned into weeks, and the battle for Earth raged on. The Empire's forces, though technologically superior, found themselves bogged down in a conflict they had not anticipated. The humans were supposed to be weak, easily crushed under the might of the Imperial war machine. But instead they fought with a ferocity that Horus had not seen in centuries, a ferocity born of desperation, of the knowledge that this was a fight for their very existence. Yet, as valiant as the resistance was, it was clear that the tide was turning against them. The Empire's relentless assault was wearing down Earth's defenses, city by city, block by block. The resistance fighters, though fierce, were running out of time, out of resources, and out of hope. It was in this darkest hour that Campbell conceived a plan so audacious, so reckless, that it might just turn the tide of the war. He knew that Earth could not hold out much longer, that their only chance of survival was to strike at the heart of the Empire itself. And so, with the last of Earth's ships, with a handful of soldiers willing to die for their cause, Campbell launched a desperate assault on the Empire's capital, Amar Prime. The journey to Amar Prime was fraught with peril. The Empire's space was heavily patrolled, its borders guarded by countless ships and stations. But Campbell's team, using the captured warp drive of an Imperial ship, navigated through the treacherous void, evading detection through a combination of cunning and sheer luck. When they emerged from warp space above Amar Prime, they were met not with the vast defenses they had feared, but with an arrogance born of overconfidence. The Empire had never imagined that the humans would dare to strike at their very heart, and as a result, the capital's defenses were lax. The element of surprise was theirs. Campbell's team, armed with the best weapons Earth had left, descended upon the planet with a fury unmatched. They cut through the Imperial defenses like a scythe through wheat, their mission clear: reach the Imperial command center, eliminate Horus, and cripple the Empire's command network. The battle that followed was the stuff of legends, a tale that would be told for generations to come. Campbell, leading from the front, fought with a ferocity that belied his years, cutting down Imperial soldiers with the precision of a seasoned warrior. His team, a mix of Earth's finest, followed his lead, their resolve as unbreakable as the steel they wielded. As they pushed deeper into the Imperial complex, the sounds of battle echoed through the halls, a symphony of destruction that heralded the end of an era. The final confrontation took place in the throne room of Emperor Horus. The room, vast and opulent, was a stark contrast to the carnage outside. Horus, his eyes gleaming with cold malice, waited for Campbell, his scaled hands gripping the hilt of a blade that had ended the lives of countless enemies. The two leaders, one human, one alien, faced each other across the expanse of the throne room, the fate of their worlds hanging in the balance. Horus, confident in his superiority, was the first to strike, his blade moving with blinding speed. But Campbell, hardened by years of battle, was ready. The two clashed in a battle of wills and skill, their blades ringing out as they struck and parried. The fight was brutal, unrelenting, and in the end it was Campbell who emerged victorious. With a final, powerful strike, he severed Horus's head from his body, the alien emperor's lifeless form crumpling to the ground. With the death of Horus, the Empire's command network was thrown into chaos. Campbell, using the codes he had taken from the Emperor's body, sent a message to every corner of the Empire. Earth may be in ruins, but humanity lives, and if the Empire does not stand down, they will unleash a hidden virus that will detonate every power core in the Imperial fleet, destroying them all. The threat was real, and the Empire, leaderless and reeling from the death of its Emperor, had no choice but to comply. The war was over, and humanity had won. But victory came at a great cost. Earth, once a thriving world, was now a smoldering ruin. The cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to ashes, their populations decimated. The survivors, scattered across the stars, began the slow and arduous task of rebuilding, of finding a new home among the colonies on Mars and beyond. Campbell, hailed as a hero, was appointed the leader of Earth's new defense force, his mission to ensure that humanity would never again be caught off guard. But even as humanity began to rebuild, a new threat loomed on the horizon. In the dark corners of the Empire, in the ruins of a once great civilization, a new leader rose. Zargon, the former second-in-command to Horus, a warrior as cunning as he was ruthless, swore vengeance on humanity. He gathered the remnants of the Imperial fleet, rallying them with promises of revenge, of a glorious return to power. Under his command, a new weapon was forged, a weapon that would put the fear of the Empire back into the hearts of the galaxy, a planet killer capable of reducing entire worlds to dust. As the Empire rebuilt its strength, word of Zargon's plans reached Campbell through his network of spies and informants. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Campbell knew that humanity could not face this threat alone. In a move that shocked even his closest advisors, Campbell reached out to Zargon, proposing an alliance against a greater threat, the Zorgon Overmind, an ancient and malevolent entity that had manipulated both humans and the Empire for its own ends. Zargon, driven by his hatred for the Overmind and his desire for revenge, agreed. The two former enemies, once bitter foes, now found themselves united in a common cause, preparing for a final desperate battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The battle that followed was unlike any that had come before. It was a battle fought not just in the physical realm, but across dimensions, in the very fabric of reality itself. The combined forces of humanity and the Empire launched an assault on the Overmind's realm, a place where the laws of physics bent and twisted, where time flowed like a river of molten glass. The Overmind, a being of pure thought and energy, was a formidable foe, but the combined might of the two greatest military forces in the galaxy proved to be its undoing. In the final epic confrontation, Campbell and Zargon, united by a common goal, faced the Overmind in its own domain. The battle was fierce, a clash of wills and power that shook the very foundations of reality. But in the end, it was Campbell's indomitable spirit, his unyielding resolve, that turned the tide. With a final, desperate act of sacrifice, Campbell merged his consciousness with the fabric of reality, becoming an eternal sentinel, a guardian of the new universe they had forged. The Overmind was destroyed, its malevolent influence eradicated, and the galaxy was free. The war was over and humanity had triumphed. But the cost was immeasurable. Earth, once the cradle of human civilization, was gone, its cities reduced to ruins, its people scattered across the stars. The Empire, once a symbol of tyranny and oppression, was shattered, its remnants struggling to survive in a galaxy that had changed forever. But in this new universe, born of fire and sacrifice, there was hope. Humanity, though battered and broken, had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with, a species that refused to bow, that refused to surrender. And as they began the long process of rebuilding, of forging a new future in the depths of space, they knew that they would never again be caught off guard. They were the survivors of Earth, the last defenders of a world that had given everything for freedom. And in the cold, dark expanse of space, they would continue to fight, to survive, and to thrive. For as long as there were stars in the sky, for as long as there was life in the universe, humanity would endure. The alliance between humanity and the remnants of the Galactic Empire was a tenuous one, held together by the thin thread of mutual desperation. In the cold, unforgiving expanse of space, trust was a luxury neither side could afford. Yet, it was necessity that forced these former enemies to work side by side, to pool their resources, their knowledge, and their willpower against a common foe that threatened the very fabric of reality. Commander Brian Campbell, now the de facto leader of what was left of humanity's military forces, found himself in a position he had never imagined, collaborating with those he had once sworn to destroy. The meetings aboard the hastily retrofitted Imperial Dreadnought, now serving as the command ship for their joint operations, were fraught with tension. Zargon, the fierce and unyielding leader of the Imperial remnants, was a warrior of immense presence, his scaled form towering over the human representatives. His eyes, dark and filled with a cold, calculating intelligence, bore into those of Campbell as they discussed strategy. There was no love lost between them, only a grudging respect born from necessity. Zargon was a creature of pure pragmatism, his loyalty to the fallen Emperor Horus now redirected towards the survival of his people and the annihilation of the Overmind that had manipulated them all. It was a bitter pill to swallow for Campbell, who had fought so hard against the Empire, who had seen his world burned and his people slaughtered at the hands of these very beings. But he knew that without this alliance there was no hope of victory. The Overmind was a threat beyond comprehension, an entity that existed not just in their universe, but in the cracks between realities, feeding on the chaos and fear that it sowed. Its power was immense, its reach unfathomable, and it would not stop until every star had been extinguished, every life snuffed out, every thought consumed. As the two leaders planned their assault on the Overmind's stronghold, deep in the uncharted regions of space, they were acutely aware that they were venturing into the unknown. The Overmind's realm was a place where the laws of physics held no sway, where time itself could twist and turn, where reality was as fluid as water. To fight there was to step into a nightmare, to face horrors that no living being was meant to witness. But there was no choice. If they did not strike now, while the Overmind was still reeling from the destruction of its latest incursion, it would recover, regroup, and unleash a new wave of destruction that would sweep across the galaxy like a plague. The preparations were grueling, the weight of their task pressing down on every soul aboard the fleet. The scientists and engineers, both human and alien, worked around the clock, modifying ships, developing new weapons, and devising strategies that defied conventional military logic. Dr. Katarina Klein, a brilliant but erratic scientist whose mind was as sharp as it was unpredictable, spearheaded the development of the dimensional anchor, a device that, in theory, would stabilize the fabric of reality within the Overmind's domain, giving their forces a fighting chance. She was aided by Krax, an Amon engineer whose mastery of quantum mechanics was unmatched even by human standards. Together they pushed the boundaries of science, creating something entirely new, something that might just be the key to victory, or to their complete annihilation. The fleet, a motley collection of human and imperial ships, each one bristling with weapons and reinforced with the latest technological advances, set course for the edge of the known universe. The journey was long and perilous, fraught with the dangers of deep space. They passed through the shattered remnants of once great civilizations, now nothing more than floating debris, silent witnesses to the Overmind's devastating power. Each day brought them closer to their destination, and with each passing moment, the tension grew. On the command ship, Campbell found himself increasingly isolated, his mind consumed by the enormity of the task ahead. He spent long hours alone in his quarters, poring over maps, battle plans, and reports, his thoughts turning ever darker. He knew that many of his people, those who had survived the initial onslaught, would never see Earth again, would never return to the homes they had fought so hard to protect. The weight of command of every life under his care pressed down on him like a physical burden. Zargon, too, felt the strain, though he would never show it. The Aimon leader was a creature of discipline, his every move calculated, his every word measured. He had seen countless battles, had led his people through war and strife. But this was different. This was a battle not just for survival, but for the very soul of the galaxy. He could sense the Overmind's influence even now as they approached its domain. It whispered to him in the dark, promising power, promising revenge. But Zargon was no fool. He knew that to succumb to the Overmind's temptations was to become its slave, to lose himself to the madness that had claimed so many before him. The fleet arrived at the edge of the Overmind's realm, a place where space itself seemed to warp and twist, where the stars were distant and cold, their light dimmed by the unnatural darkness that pervaded this region of space. The dimensional anchor was deployed, its massive structure unfolding like a flower in the void, its energy field spreading out to encompass the fleet. The effect was immediate. The twisting, chaotic forces that had made navigation nearly impossible began to stabilize. The ship's systems returned to normal, and the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the danger was far from over. As the fleet pushed deeper into the Overmind's territory, they encountered resistance. The Overmind's minions, creatures born of pure energy, twisted and corrupted by their master's will, launched relentless attacks on the fleet. These were beings of unimaginable power, their forms shifting and changing with each passing moment, their very existence a violation of the natural laws of the universe. The battles were fierce and unrelenting, the fleet's weapons struggling to make any impact on these otherworldly foes. It was only through the combined efforts of the human and imperial forces, their tactics and strategies honed by years of war, that they were able to hold their ground. But it was clear that they could not win this battle through force of arms alone. They needed to reach the heart of the Overmind's realm, to strike at the source of its power, to end this once and for all. Campbell knew that the final confrontation would be unlike any battle he had ever fought. The Overmind was not a physical being, not something that could be killed with bullets or bombs. It was a creature of thought, of pure will, and it would take more than weapons to defeat it. It would take a strength of mind, a unity of purpose, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The plan devised by Katarina and Krax was as bold as it was dangerous. They would use the dimensional anchor to create a breach in the fabric of reality, allowing them to enter the Overmind's domain, to confront it on its own terms. Once inside, they would deploy a series of quantum destabilizers, devices that would disrupt the Overmind's control over the dimensional plane, weakening it enough for them to strike the final blow. It was a plan fraught with risks, one that could easily end in disaster. But it was their only chance. The fleet gathered at the edge of the breach, the ship's engines humming with power as they prepared to make the jump. Campbell stood on the bridge of his ship, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex that marked the entrance to the Overmind's realm. He knew that once they crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. The die was cast, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. With a final command, the fleet plunged into the breach, the ship's hulls shimmering as they crossed the boundary between realities. The transition was jarring, the very fabric of space seeming to tear apart as they passed through. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a place unlike any they had ever seen. The Overmind's realm was a nightmare made manifest, a place where the laws of physics were of jagged rocks and bubbling pools of molten metal. The fleet, now scattered across this hellish landscape, began to regroup, the ships hovering above the ground, their weapons trained on the horizon. But there was no time to rest. The Overmind's forces were already on the move, converging on the fleet from all directions. The creatures, twisted and malformed, their bodies a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, moved with terrifying speed, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The battle that followed was unlike any that had come before. The air was filled with the sounds of weapons fire, the screams of the dying, and the roar of engines as the ships maneuvered to avoid the onslaught. Campbell, leading from the front, directed his forces with a calm precision, his mind focused on the task at hand. But it was clear that they were outmatched. The Overmind's minions were too powerful, too numerous, and the fleet was slowly being overwhelmed. It was then that Zargon made a decision that would change the course of the battle. Realizing that they could not win this fight through conventional means, he ordered his ship to make a suicidal charge at the heart of the enemy forces. The massive dreadnought, its hull bristling with weapons, plunged into the enemy lines, its guns blazing. The impact was devastating, the sheer force of the collision sending shockwaves through the battlefield. But Zargon was not done. As his ship was torn apart by the enemy's fire, he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence, the explosion ripping through the enemy ranks, destroying hundreds of the Overmind's minions in an instant. The sacrifice bought the fleet precious time, allowing them to regroup and press the attack. Campbell, witnessing the destruction of Zargon's ship, felt a pang of sorrow for the loss of a warrior who had, in the end, proven to be a true ally. But there was no time to mourn. The final phase of the plan was at hand. The quantum destabilizers were deployed, their fields spreading out across the battlefield, disrupting the Overmind's control over its forces. The creatures, once so powerful, began to falter, their forms unraveling as the destabilizers took effect. Campbell knew that this was their chance, their one and only shot at victory. He ordered the fleet to focus all their firepower on the Overmind's core, a massive structure at the center of the battlefield, pulsating with dark energy. The fleet's weapons, powered by the last reserves of their energy, unleashed a torrent of destruction. The beams of light and plasma tearing into the Overmind's core. The ground shook, the sky darkened, and for a moment it seemed as though the very fabric of reality was about to collapse. But then, with a final, earth-shattering explosion, the core was destroyed, the Overmind's hold on the dimensional plane shattered. The creatures, once so fierce, collapsed into piles of ash and metal, their life force drained, their existence ended. The battle was over, the Overmind defeated, its threat to the galaxy ended. But the victory was bittersweet. The cost had been immense. Thousands of lives had been lost, entire worlds destroyed, and the survivors were left to pick up the pieces of a galaxy that had been forever changed. Campbell, standing on the bridge of his ship, looked out at the ruins of the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of command. He knew that the fight was not truly over. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, filled with threats both old and new. But for now, at least, they had won a reprieve, a chance to rebuild, to recover, to find a new path forward. As the fleet began the long journey back to what was left of human and imperial space, Campbell allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of the friends he had lost, of the sacrifices that had been made, of the battles that had been fought. He thought of Zargon, a warrior who had once been his enemy, but who had died as his ally, his sacrifice a testament to the strength of their resolve. He thought of Earth, now little more than a memory, a world that had given everything for the survival of its people. But most of all, he thought of the future, of the challenges that lay ahead, of the new worlds they would have to explore, the new threats they would have to face. The galaxy was vast and filled with dangers, but it was also filled with opportunities, with possibilities. And as long as humanity endured, as long as there were those willing to fight for what was right, there was hope. Campbell knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be many more battles to fight, many more sacrifices to make. But he also knew that they were not alone. They had allies, they had each other, and they had the strength and determination to face whatever came their way. For as long as there were stars in the sky, for as long as there was life in the universe, humanity would endure.